I want you to picture something for me. Picture a man, 61 years old, 22 years of landlording, 34 tenants across 4 properties, standing outside a building he no longer owns, with nothing but a cardboard box, watching strangers. Change the locks on his front door. That man is my former landlord, and I am the reason that happened. Not because I was powerful, not because I had money or connections or a team of lawyers, but because I paid attention, I documented everything. And I refused, absolutely refused, to be another tenant who swallowed the injustice and moved on. This story starts in the most ordinary way possible: a leaking pipe, a phone call, and a landlord who didn't pick up. By the time it ends, that landlord will have lost not 1, not 2, but all 4 of his properties. Stay with me, because every single detail of what I'm about to tell you is going to matter. Let me take you back 22 months ago. I had just moved into what I genuinely believed was my fresh start. A 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in a neighborhood I had spent 2 years saving up to afford. Not luxury, but mine. Clean walls, good light, a little balcony overlooking the street. I remember standing in that empty apartment on the first day, just breathing it in. My name was on the lease. That felt like something. My landlord's name was Gerald Hoffman. He showed up to sign the paperwork in a pressed shirt and talked for 20 minutes about how he treated his tenants like family, how his buildings were his pride, how there was always someone available if anything went wrong. He shook my hand when he left. Firm grip, direct eye contact, the whole performance. I believed him for exactly 43 days. That's how long it took before the first thing broke. The pipe under the kitchen sink started leaking on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic burst, just a slow, quiet drip that pooled under the cabinet and soaked into the wood overnight. I called Gerald. Voicemail. I texted Gerald. Read receipt. No reply. I called the building management number listed on my lease. Disconnected. I left a note in his physical mailbox downstairs because, yes, I had already learned that Gerald still used a physical mailbox. Explaining the issue, the location, the urgency. Nothing. For 11 days, nothing. On day 12, I hired a plumber myself, $90 out of my own pocket. Sent Gerald the receipt with a polite message asking him to deduct it from next month's rent as permitted under the tenancy agreement. He replied to that one within 4 minutes. His response was 3 words: "That's not how this works." And right there, in that moment, reading those 4 words on my phone screen, something shifted in me. Not anger, not yet, something quieter. I opened a notes app on my phone, typed the date, the time, wrote down every single thing that had happened since I moved in. I didn't know it yet, but that notes app was going to become the most important document of the next 18 months of my life, because the pipe was just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, here is what broke, failed, or was simply ignored in my apartment. The kitchen pipe, week 6, ignored for 11 days. The heating unit, month 2, completely stopped working during the coldest week of the year. I slept in a coat for 9 days while Gerald told me the repair was being scheduled. The front door lock, month 3, the cylinder cracked. The door didn't lock properly. I told Gerald I felt unsafe. He told me, and I am quoting directly here, "It still closes, doesn't it?" The bathroom extractor fan, month 4, stopped working entirely. Mold began appearing on the ceiling within 3 weeks. I sent photos. Gerald said he'd look into it. He did not look into it. The hot water, month 5, intermittent. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes none. I started showering at the gym down the street. 6 months, 6 separate issues, dozens of messages, 0 repairs completed. And through every single one of them, I documented everything. Photos with timestamps, text messages screenshotted and saved. Every voicemail transcribed into my notes, every date, every response, every silence. What Gerald did not know was that I had worked for 3 years as a legal assistant before changing careers. I understood documentation. I understood paper trails. And I understood, very clearly, that he was building one for me without even realizing it. But here's where the story takes its first real turn. And I need you to stay close here because what Gerald did next is the move that sealed his fate completely. It was a Thursday morning, 7:48 a.m. I know the time because I had just made coffee and was standing at my kitchen window watching the street wake up below me. I heard footsteps in the hallway, then a sound, the sound of something being slid under my door. I walked over, looked down. It was an envelope, white, crisp, officially sealed. I picked it up, opened it, notice of eviction, 30 days to vacate the premises. I read it twice, 3 times. Standing there in my socks with a coffee cup in my hand, reading a document that told me I had 30 days to leave the home I had spent 2 years saving to afford. The stated reason: persistent failure to maintain the property in a satisfactory condition. I want you to let that sit for a moment. The man who had not fixed a single thing in 6 months, the man whose building had a broken lock, black mold on the bathroom ceiling, no consistent hot water, was evicting me for not maintaining the property. I stood there, and I felt something I did not expect to feel. Not panic, not devastation, relief. Because in that moment, I realized Gerald had just made the biggest strategic mistake of his entire landlording career. He had put his intentions in writing, official, dated, signed, and I had 6 months of documented evidence that told the exact opposite story. I set the eviction notice down on the kitchen counter, picked up my phone, and made 2 calls. The first call was to a tenant rights organization in my city. I had found them 3 months earlier, bookmarked them quietly in my phone, just in case. The woman I spoke to, I'll call her Patricia, listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much documentation do you have?" I told her. 6 months of photos, texts, voicemails, written logs, receipts for repairs I had paid for myself. Another silence. Then, "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I was there at 9 a.m. Patricia sat across from me at a small desk and went through my documentation folder. Because by this point I had printed everything, organized it chronologically, and put it in a physical folder, the way I used to prepare files as a legal assistant. She turned pages quietly for 11 minutes. Then she looked up at me and said, "This isn't just a tenant dispute." She explained what she was seeing in the documentation. Under housing law in our jurisdiction, a landlord is legally required to maintain a property in a habitable condition. Hot water, secure locks, these are not optional. They are legal requirements. 6 months of documented failures, combined with the retaliatory eviction notice, was not just a civil matter. It was a potential violation of housing codes enforceable by the local housing authority. That was call 1. Call 2 was to the city's housing inspection department. I explained I wanted to formally report uninhabitable conditions at a rental property. They asked for the address. I gave it. They told me an inspector would be assigned within 15 business days. Now here is where I need to tell you something important, because while I was doing all of this, while I was sitting with Patricia and calling housing inspectors, I was also thinking bigger, because of something I had noticed. Something in Gerald's behavior that had been nagging at me for weeks. The broken lock, the mold, the heating failure. These weren't just happening in my apartment. I had spoken to the tenant on the 2nd floor, Maya, in the elevator 2 months earlier. She had mentioned, casually, almost as a joke, that her kitchen ceiling had been water damaged since before she moved in, and Gerald had promised to fix it 18 months ago. I knocked on Maya's door that evening, told her what was happening, showed her the eviction notice. Watched her face go from shock to fury in about 4 seconds. She had documentation too, not as organized as mine, but it existed. We spent 3 hours at her kitchen table that night, going through her messages with Gerald, photographing everything, building her file. And then Maya mentioned something that made my blood run completely cold. She said, "You know he's been doing this for years, right? The family in 4B, he evicted them last winter. Said they damaged the property. They had a 2-year-old. A pattern. Gerald had a pattern. He let properties deteriorate, ignored repairs, and when tenants complained loudly enough, he evicted them before they could escalate. I went home that night and I made a decision. I was not going to just fight my eviction. I was going to end the pattern." The housing inspector arrived 14 days later. Her name was Officer Chen. Clipboard, camera, measuring tape. The complete picture of official authority. I had prepared for this visit the same way I used to prepare files for court submissions. I printed my full documentation folder, organized it by issue, date, and correspondence. I had a 1-page summary, at the front listing every violation with its corresponding evidence reference number. Officer Chen walked through my apartment methodically. She documented the mold, 3 separate patches now. She tested the heating unit, still not fully functional. She photographed the bathroom extractor. She tested the door lock, failed the security standard immediately. Then I asked her, and this was the moment I had been building toward. I asked her whether she was able to inspect the rest of the building, given my concerns about other tenants. She looked at me, then at my documentation folder, then back at me. "Do you have reason to believe other units are affected?" I handed her Maya's file. Officer Chen spent 4 hours in that building. She inspected 6 of the 8 units. She found violations in 5 of them, heating failures across 3 units, water damage in 2, a fire escape on the 2nd floor that had a structural fault, a fire escape that had apparently been flagged in a previous inspection 2 years earlier and never addressed. Let me say that again. A fire escape with a structural fault, flagged 2 years ago, never fixed. Officer Chen left the building at 4:17 p.m. As she passed me in the hallway, she said very quietly, very professionally, "Expect a formal notice within 10 days. I stood in that hallway after she left. And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I allowed myself to feel it. Not satisfaction, not yet, just certainty. The kind of certainty you feel when you realize the outcome of something is no longer a question." The formal notice from the housing authority arrived in 9 days. Gerald received it simultaneously. I know this because Maya texted me at 11 a.m. that morning. "He's in the building. He looks terrible." Gerald knocked on my door 20 minutes later. I opened it. He looked, and I want to be precise about this, he looked like a man who had just seen a version of the future he had never considered possible. The pressed shirt was gone. The firm handshake energy was gone. He stood in my doorway in a wrinkled jacket, holding his own copy of the housing authority notice, and he said, "Can we talk about this?" I told him there was nothing to talk about, that everything that needed to be communicated would now go through official channels. I closed the door. What happened over the following 6 weeks was like watching a building that had been structurally compromised finally begin to collapse floor by floor in slow motion. Week 1, the housing authority issued Gerald a formal violation order. 17 separate code violations across the building. He was given 30 days to remediate. Week 2, the city's legal department contacted Gerald regarding the structural fault on the fire escape. This was not a civil matter. A fire escape fault of that severity, previously flagged and ignored, was a criminal negligence issue. Week 3, 3 more tenants came forward. Tenants from Gerald's other 2 properties across the city. They had seen the housing authority notices. They had their own stories, their own documentation, some going back 4 years. Week 4, Gerald's insurance provider was notified of the structural fault. They launched their own investigation. And quietly, very quietly, they informed Gerald that his liability coverage was being reviewed pending the outcome. Week 5, a law firm contacted me. One that had been building a class action case against landlords in our city with patterns of retaliatory eviction and housing code negligence. They had found my documentation through the housing authority filing. They asked if I would be willing to be the lead plaintiff. I said yes before they finished the sentence. Week 6, Gerald's mortgage provider was notified of the housing authority violations and the pending legal action. Under the terms of Gerald's mortgage agreements, and this is the detail that ended everything, sustained housing code. Violations constituted a breach of the mortgage covenant. The mortgage provider issued Gerald a formal notice. Remediate all violations within 45 days or face accelerated repayment of all outstanding loans. Gerald could not remediate 17 code violations across 4 properties in 45 days. Not financially, not logistically, not in any version of reality. He simply could not do it. It was a Tuesday morning, 4 months after the eviction notice had been slid under my door. I was making coffee, again, standing at my kitchen window, when I saw a van pull up outside the building. 2 people got out. Not inspectors this time, not investigators. They were carrying a lockbox, the kind banks use when they take possession of a property. I set my coffee down. 20 minutes later, Gerald pulled up in his car. He sat inside it for a long time, just sat there, looking at the building through his windshield. Eventually, he got out, opened his trunk, removed a cardboard box. He walked toward the building, but the 2 people from the van were already at the door. There was a brief conversation, quiet. I could not hear it from the 3rd floor, and then Gerald stepped back, looked up at the building, all 4 floors of it, and I watched something happen to his face that I will never fully be able to describe. It was the look of a man who had spent 22 years building something, and had finally understood in one single moment that it was gone. He picked up his cardboard box, walked back to his car, and drove away. I never saw Gerald Hoffman again. Here is what the final picture looked like. The class action lawsuit settled 8 months later. 14 tenants across Gerald's 4 properties. The settlement covered 2 years of reduced rent paid back to affected tenants, repair costs, legal fees, and a financial penalty that I am not able to disclose under the settlement terms. But I can tell you this, it was enough. All 4 of Gerald's properties were seized by the mortgage provider and subsequently sold. The fire escape, the one with the structural fault that had been ignored for 2 years, was repaired by the new owners within 3 weeks of taking possession. 3 weeks. What Gerald could not do in 2 years, someone else did in 3 weeks. Maya, my neighbor, my ally, stayed in the building after the sale, under new management, with a functioning kitchen ceiling. She texted me when they finished the repair. Just a photo. A clean, white, perfectly intact ceiling. No caption. She didn't need one. As for the eviction notice, the one Gerald slid under my door at 7:48 on a Thursday morning, the judge in the preliminary hearing dismissed it in under 4 minutes for a document Gerald had apparently believed was going to solve all of his problems. Here is what I want you to take from this story, and I mean this with everything I have. Gerald was not uniquely evil. He was not a cartoon villain. He was a man who had gotten away with something for so long that he had stopped believing anyone would ever push back. He had built his entire strategy on the assumption that tenants, people like me, would be too scared, too broke, too exhausted to fight back. What he never accounted for was someone who documented everything. Someone who knocked on a neighbor's door instead of suffering alone. Someone who understood that the system, as broken as it often is, has tools in it, if you know where to look, if you are patient enough to use them correctly. Gerald handed me an eviction notice thinking it was the end of my story. It was the end of his. That is karma filed, real betrayal, real documentation, real justice. If this story's hit you somewhere deep, you already know what to do. Subscribe. Hit the bell. I'll see you Friday.